He fixed her car with shaky hands and a borrowed wrench, just to help. He never expected her to return, with a convoy of lawyers, executives, and a deal that could change his life forever. Before we dive in, hit that subscribe button and drop a comment. Where in the world are you watching from? The bell over the garage door hadn't rung all morning. Miguel sat on an overturned oil drum, elbows on his knees, eyes fixed on the cracked concrete floor beneath his boots. The air smelled of rust and gasoline, faintly sweet like something dying slow. A fan in the corner clicked with every turn, its motor on its last breath, just like everything else around here. Outside, the sky pressed down, gray and heavy, the kind of weather that made time feel slower. Miguel's hands, permanently stained with grease, clutched a worn rag he kept twisting without realizing. He looked up at the old sign hanging by a single rusted chain, Manny's Auto and Tire, his father's name, his father's dream. Now it was a skeleton of a shop, a graveyard of unpaid invoices, broken tools, and stories no one asked about anymore. The bank had called again that morning. Third notice. The voice on the other end had sounded rehearsed, like they'd already written him off. One more month, maybe two, before they'd come for the property. Rent was past due, parts suppliers had stopped extending credit, and last week someone had stolen the only working battery charger while Miguel was out grabbing a sandwich from the corner bodega. Still, he opened the shop every morning at 7. Still, he swept the floor even when no one came. Still, he turned on the radio to drown out the silence. He couldn't leave. This garage was all he had, all he knew. His fingers ached constantly now, joints stiff from years of cold mornings and heavier engines. He used to laugh more, back when his dad was alive, when customers dropped off pies during the holidays and the register actually closed with bills inside. Now he patched what he could, recycled old bolts, reused everything. He'd become a surgeon of scraps, making miracles out of parts no one wanted. The town had changed. Big franchises had moved in, places with free Wi-Fi and espresso machines in the waiting room. Miguel had none of that. Just his honesty, and a name people used to trust. As the wind picked up outside, rattling the loose siding, Miguel stood. If someone came today, he'd help them, whether they paid or not, because this was still his shop. And sometimes fixing something broken was the only thing that reminded him he wasn't. The eviction notice had been duct-taped to the glass door when Miguel arrived that morning, the red letters screaming through the foggy glass like blood on snow. Final warning. He peeled it off slowly, hands trembling more than he wanted to admit, then crumpled it and stuffed it into the front pocket of his coveralls like it was just another receipt, another scrap. But it wasn't. It was the end. Inside, the garage was colder than usual, the overhead heater dead since last week, when the ignition switch shorted out. He hadn't had the money to fix it. He hadn't had the money to fix a damn thing. The compressor wheezed like an old man on his deathbed. The hydraulic lift stuttered halfway up and froze yesterday, trapping a customer's Camry in midair like some mechanical purgatory. Miguel had promised he'd sort it out. Just a fuse, he'd said. But he didn't even have a fuse. He'd taken one from an old coffee maker and hoped it would fit. The coffee was gone, too. The pot had shattered 3 days ago, slipping out of his hand when the phone rang, and the voice on the other end told him his father's name was about to be erased from the property title. Just like that. After 34 years of work, sweat, and love poured into these oil-stained walls. Miguel sat behind the counter, head in his hands, surrounded by tools he couldn't afford to replace and bills he couldn't afford to ignore. His fingers pressed into his eyes like he could hold back the world from crumbling. The silence was loud. It mocked him. A photo on the wall showed his father holding a wrench, smiling, grease on his cheek. Miguel stared at it for a long time. "I'm sorry, Pop," he whispered. He'd sworn never to sell out, never to take a loan he couldn't repay, never to turn his father's shop into a parking lot or a vape store or a fast food dump like the rest of the block. But now the choices were running thin. It was either give up or be swallowed. He stood slowly, legs aching, and opened the garage door to the cold morning. One more day. One more chance. He didn't believe it, not really. But he had to try. The rain hit the roof like it had something to prove. Thick drops slammed against the tin and dripped through the leak in the far corner Miguel still hadn't patched. He sat hunched over the front desk, tracing a cracked line in the formica with a screwdriver tip, when he heard it, an engine sputtering, choking, and then dying right outside. He stood slowly, muscles stiff from the cold, and wiped his hands on a rag already stained from the day before. Through the blurry garage window, he saw it, a small battered sedan with steam rising from under the hood, smoke curling like fingers into the wet air. Its hazard lights blinked like a heartbeat in distress. Miguel stepped out, rain soaking through his flannel within seconds. The engine ticked like a bomb cooling down. He approached the car cautiously, unsure who or what he'd find. The driver's side window rolled down halfway with a painful grind. Inside was a young woman, maybe mid-20s, hair soaked, eyes wide and scanning everything like she expected it to vanish. "You okay?" Miguel asked, raising his voice over the storm. She nodded too quickly. I think the radiator blew. Or something. I don't know. It just started smoking and—" her voice cracked. "I saw your sign. I didn't know where else to go." He nodded once. "Turn it off. Leave the keys. You're soaked. Come inside." She hesitated. That half-second pause didn't go unnoticed, like she had to decide if he was a bigger threat than the storm. But she got out, clutching her bag tight, and followed him in. Inside, the shop was dim, warmer by comparison, but barely. Miguel offered her a towel, which she declined, and stood near the door like she needed an escape route. "Any place you need to be?" he asked gently. "No," she said too fast. Then again, quieter. "No." She wouldn't meet his eyes. Her fingers trembled. And when the sleeves of her coat slid up, Miguel noticed the bruises on her wrist. Old, yellowed ones. A fresh one, too. His stomach turned. "I'll take a look," he said quietly. He didn't ask questions. Not yet. But something told him this car wasn't the only thing broken. Miguel didn't ask what happened. Not when she kept tugging her sleeve down every time it slipped. Not when she jumped at the sound of the impact wrench firing up. Not even when he caught her glancing at the door like someone might burst through it at any moment. He just worked. The hood of the car was propped open with a rusty crowbar. The radiator was shot, cracked through the top, coolant dripping in slow, tired pulses. Belts were frayed, the battery was nearly dead, and 2 of the tires were bald enough to show thread. He could hear his father's voice in his head. This thing shouldn't be on the road, and that girl shouldn't be alone. She sat quietly on the ragged old chair near the front desk, her wet coat still clinging to her shoulders. Miguel didn't press. He saw the bruises, saw how she flinched when the thunder cracked. He'd seen that look before, on people trying to disappear, trying to hold themselves together with nothing but silence and fear. After an hour, he wiped his hands on his pants and stepped inside, voice low. "You got someone who can come get you?" She shook her head. "A place to stay?" Another shake. He nodded slowly, lips pressed tight. "Car's fixable," he said. "But you'll need a new radiator. Battery, too. I got a spare I can make work." She hesitated. "How much?" Miguel looked at her, really looked. The waterlogged coat, the smudges under her eyes, the way she kept her bag clutched like a life preserver. "Nothing." "What?" "I said don't worry about it." She blinked. "I don't have anything, not even a card." "I know." He turned away, already reaching for his tools. "You don't owe me." There was a long pause behind him. Then, "Why?" He glanced back, met her eyes just once. "'Cause you're here. That's reason enough." She didn't respond, just sat there like no one had ever said that to her before. Miguel went back to work, rain still hammering the roof, thunder grumbling like an old god overhead. He didn't ask who she was running from. He didn't need to. The storm didn't let up. If anything, it got worse, sheets of rain pounding the tin roof so hard it sounded like it might collapse. The town was quiet, shut down early by weather and fear, but Miguel's garage burned on under flickering fluorescent lights and the stubborn hum of old machinery. The girl, she said her name was Elena, had curled up in the corner chair, her coat folded into a makeshift pillow. Her breathing had finally slowed. Miguel watched her for a second before turning back to the car. The radiator was the worst of it. He had an old one out back from a junked Civic that was close enough to fit if he could cut the brackets and sand the mounts down. Not perfect, but she didn't need perfect. She needed out. And soon. He worked with the kind of quiet urgency that came from knowing time was not on your side. His tools were blunt with age, handles wrapped in duct tape, but his hands moved like they'd done this 1,000 times, because they had. Each bolt he turned felt like a promise he couldn't afford to break. Each part he retooled was one step toward giving her something she didn't have right now, a way forward. By midnight the heater had coughed its last breath, and the cold crept in like smoke. Miguel kept moving to stay warm, breath fogging in the air, sweat freezing against his skin. He burned his palm on a slip wrench and barely cursed. There wasn't time for pain. At one point he stood over the open hood, staring at the mess of wires and rust and cracked plastic. He could feel the weight of it all pressing down, the debt, the failing shop, the years of effort fading into nothing. But then he glanced through the window at Elena, curled up, vulnerable, like a broken bird waiting for wings. So he kept going. By 5 a.m., the engine turned over with a reluctant growl. It wasn't pretty, but it ran. That was enough. Miguel leaned against the wall, soaked in sweat and grease, and something that felt like hope. Maybe borrowed, maybe foolish. But it was something. The sun hadn't fully risen yet, just a thin, pale light bleeding through the low clouds. The storm had finally broken sometime after 5, leaving the streets washed clean and the air damp with that strange quiet that comes after something violent. Miguel rubbed his eyes and stretched the stiffness out of his back, every joint creaking like old floorboards. He turned toward the corner of the shop where she'd been. The chair was empty. "Elena?" he called, voice hoarse. Nothing. The blanket he'd tossed over her during the night was folded neatly on the armrest. Her coat was gone. So was she. Miguel's stomach dropped. He pushed through the front door, eyes scanning the lot, the street, the bus stop across the way. No car, no silhouette, just puddles reflecting the sky and the distant sound of a delivery truck grumbling somewhere blocks away. Back inside, he saw it, a piece of paper folded and wedged under a cracked coffee mug on the front desk. His name scrawled across it in uneven handwriting. He unfolded it slowly. "Thank you for more than the repair." No name, no contact, just that. Miguel stood there for a long minute, note in hand, heart thudding against his ribs in a way he didn't quite understand. He didn't know what he expected, that she'd still be there, that she'd say goodbye, that maybe, just maybe, she'd explain why her hands shook when she thought no one was looking. But no explanation came, just that short sentence, small and weightless, and somehow heavy enough to anchor the whole damn room. He sat down hard on the stool, elbows on the counter, the note still clutched in his fingers. Maybe she had somewhere she needed to be, maybe someone was looking for her, or maybe she'd simply gotten used to running before people asked too many questions. Still, he couldn't shake the hollow that opened in his chest, like something meaningful had passed through his life in the dark and disappeared before he could really see it. He didn't know her story, didn't know where she'd gone, but he hoped the car held up, and he hoped, God, he really hoped, that wherever she ended up, she found someone else who wouldn't ask questions either. The first time someone mentioned it, Miguel didn't think much of it. "Hey, you get a new customer or something? Saw a black SUV parked out front the other night. Fancy one? Tinted windows, real quiet." It was Old Man Harold from across the street, the kind of guy who had nothing better to do than monitor the neighborhood through his living room blinds. Miguel gave a tired shrug, still halfway under the hood of a '92 Chevy with a cracked manifold. "Probably just lost," he mumbled. "No one around here drives anything that clean." But then it happened again. 2 days later, Rosa from the bakery leaned over the counter and whispered, "There were men asking about you, Miguel. 2 of them, dressed nice, too nice. Asking if you'd worked on a silver sedan last week. Asking if anyone saw the girl who was driving it." Miguel froze mid-reach for his coffee. "What did you tell them?" "Nothing," she said. "I said I didn't know anything. But, Miguel—" Her eyes softened. "Who was she?" He didn't answer, couldn't, because he didn't know. And that was what haunted him. They kept coming. Not every day, but often enough. Parked cars with government plates, strangers lingering across the street pretending to talk on their phones. One night, he swore he saw someone walk the perimeter of his garage, flashlight flickering low across the dirt and gravel behind the back gate. Miguel started locking up earlier, kept a crowbar behind the counter. Not that he'd know what to do with it if it came to that. Still, he couldn't shake the tension that wrapped around his ribs every time he heard tires on wet pavement or saw a car slow down too long out front. And always, in the back of his mind, was she okay? Did they find her? He didn't know who they were. Cops? Suits? Something worse? One morning, he found footprints in the mud near the back entrance. Men's boots. Fresh. Whoever she was, whatever she'd been running from, it hadn't stopped. It had only changed directions. And now it was pointed straight at him. It was almost closing time when the phone rang. An old landline that barely worked and hadn't rung in days. Miguel stared at it for a second, like it was some kind of trick. No one called the shop anymore, not unless it was another bill collector or someone trying to sell synthetic oil packages. He wiped his hands on a rag and picked it up. Manny's Auto. There was a pause on the other end, no static, no breath. Just that sharp, sterile silence that made the hairs on his arms lift. "Is this Miguel Alvarez?" A man's voice, smooth, precise, not local, not casual. "Who's asking?" Another pause, longer this time. "Let's just say I represent a party interested in a potential partnership with you." Miguel's brow furrowed. He glanced out the front window. The street was empty, the sky bruised purple with the end of the day. "Partnership? I don't do joint ventures. I don't have anything worth—" "We're aware of your current situation," the man interrupted, still calm, still eerily polite. "The financial hardship, the missed payments, the mechanical limitations." Miguel's stomach dropped. "How do you know about that?" The voice smiled. He couldn't see it, but he could hear it. "We know more than you think, which is why we'd like to speak, privately. Tomorrow morning, 9 a.m. sharp. Address will be sent." Sent how? But the line had already gone dead. Miguel stared at the receiver in his hand, heart pounding like a drumline in his chest. He set it down slowly, mind racing. Something about the call felt off. Not threatening exactly, but too precise, too informed. A minute later, his cell phone buzzed. Unknown number, one text. 9 a.m., Café Sol, corner booth. He hadn't given them his number. Miguel backed away from the desk like the walls had started moving in. Whoever was on the other end of that call, they knew him, knew Elena, knew too much. And now they wanted to meet. But why? They pulled up just after noon, 3 black SUVs in a line like a funeral procession. Engines quiet, windows darker than ink. Miguel had been under the hood of an old Accord, half distracted, trying to forget the strange phone call and the text that still sat unopened on his phone. But when he heard the doors open, soft, in sync, he knew. He wiped his hands quickly, heart stuttering in his chest. A woman stepped out first, high heels clicking on the cracked pavement like gunshots. She was tall, poised, hair swept back in a way that screamed money and precision. Behind her came 2 men, both in tailored suits, pressed so sharp it looked like they could cut glass. The third figure emerged from the second SUV. Miguel's hands froze mid-wipe. It was her, Elena, but not the same. She wasn't wearing the baggy coat or scuffed sneakers this time. Her hair was smooth, lips painted, coat long and expensive-looking. Her eyes met his and held there, cool, unreadable, like she'd never curled up in his garage chair or eaten crackers from a vending machine with shaking fingers. "Mr. Alvarez," the tall woman said, stepping forward and extending a manicured hand. He didn't move. "We're with Villarreal Motors. We represent Ms. Villarreal and the executive board." Villarreal? The name hit him like a slap. He turned to Elena, the realization punching a hole through his chest. She looked the same, and not at all. "You lied," he said quietly. She flinched, just barely, but enough. "I didn't lie," she said. Her voice was softer than the others, but steady. "I just didn't tell you who I was." The tall woman cleared her throat. "Ms. Villarreal would like to discuss a business proposal with you, privately." Miguel blinked, still trying to catch up. The woman he'd stayed up all night helping, the one who'd vanished without a goodbye, was the daughter of the Villarreal Empire, a billion-dollar legacy. And she was standing on his cracked driveway like nothing had happened. "What do you want?" he asked, voice low. Elena stepped forward, her eyes warmer now, searching his. "To repay a debt," she said, "and maybe change your life." Miguel sat across from her in the cramped break room, the one with the crooked table and the flickering light bulb that buzzed louder when it rained. The corporate suits had stayed outside, hovering near their SUVs like bodyguards pretending not to listen. Miguel could still see one pacing through the dusty garage window. Elena sat with her coat folded neatly over the chair back, her posture straight, hands resting calmly in her lap. The last time she was in this room, she'd looked like she was trying not to disappear into the floor. Now she looked like she owned the building, and maybe the block around it too. Miguel didn't touch the coffee he'd poured. It was already cold. "I didn't come here to fool you," she said, voice low, eyes fixed on the table between them. "I came because I needed to disappear. And I thought, if I could be around someone who saw me as a person, not a name or a target, I could breathe." Miguel leaned back, arms crossed. "You knew who I was, knew about the shop, my debt, my father. You didn't just stumble in that night." "I didn't," she admitted, "but I also didn't know what I was going to find." He studied her face. The calm mask was cracking now, just a little. Her eyes looked tired in a way money couldn't fix. "My father owns Villarreal Motors," she continued. "He's not just rich, he's ruthless. A machine in a suit. I was supposed to be the face of his next generation, the heir. But I couldn't live with how he built it, what he did to people like you, honest people." Miguel's jaw tightened. "So you vanished to my doorstep and let me patch together your car like some kind of test? Number, I didn't know what I was doing. I just ran. And when you helped me without asking who I was, when you didn't judge me or press or try to use me, it changed something." She reached into her bag and pulled out a thick folder. She slid it across the table. "What's this?" Miguel asked. "A proposal, for you, for this garage." He didn't open it. He just stared at her. "You could have told me the truth," he said. "I didn't think you'd help me if you knew," she replied. And she wasn't wrong. Miguel leaned against the counter, arms crossed, the unopened folder still sitting between them like it was wired to explode. The garage was silent, save for the occasional creak of the rafters in the wind. Elena didn't look away. She looked like someone ready to confess something that had been poisoning her from the inside. "I didn't run away because I was in danger," she said. "Not really. I ran because I needed to know if anything good was left out there. If people were still good." Miguel blinked, caught between disbelief and anger. "So this was an experiment?" "No," she said quickly. "It wasn't that. I wasn't out there with a camera or a clipboard. I was breaking." He said nothing. Let her fill the silence. "My father's world. It's all leverage. Everything's a transaction. People smile to your face and sell you out the second your back is turned. You're never helping anyone. You're just making trades. Favors for favors. Power for loyalty. I grew up thinking that was normal." She paused, hands folding tightly in her lap. "So I left. Took the car no one would recognize. Dressed down. Disappeared. I thought maybe, just maybe, I'd find someone who'd see me and not my last name." "And you landed here," Miguel said, the bitterness creeping through his voice. She nodded. "It was pouring. My phone was dead. My money was down to coins. And there you were, in this broken-down shop, with nothing left to give. And you gave anyway." Miguel shook his head. "I gave because you looked like you needed help, not because I was trying to prove a point." "I know," she said. "That's exactly why it mattered." He looked at her for a long moment, jaw clenched. He thought of the sleepless night, the bruises she wouldn't explain, the broken radiator, the silence she left behind like a ghost. He thought of the food he hadn't eaten that week, the bills piled like bricks on his desk, and how he'd helped her anyway, because it was the right thing to do. "Not everyone's like your father," he said quietly. "I know that now," she whispered, "because of you." Miguel stared down at the folder like it might bite him. The seal on the front was simple. Villarreal Motors, embossed in clean silver. No gimmicks, no gloss, just weight. Real and heavy and impossible to ignore. Elena sat across from him, watching without pushing. The silence stretched between them like a live wire. "You want to buy my shop?" Miguel said finally, the words landing flat. "But not to tear it down. You want to make it a—" "What?" "A symbol," she said softly. "A flagship location. For a new campaign we're launching. Kindness drives us." He let out a bitter breath. "That's some marketing slogan you cooked up after a weekend in the real world?" She didn't flinch. "It's more than a slogan. It's a shift, a challenge, and we want this place to be the heart of it." Miguel ran a hand through his hair, the grease leaving darker streaks through the strands. "This shop is falling apart. The lift's broken, the heater barely works, and the front sign's about to fall off. You want that to represent your empire?" "Yes," she said, firm now, "because it's real. Because you kept showing up even when you had nothing. Because you helped people without asking what they could do for you." He opened the folder slowly. Inside were detailed renderings, investment figures, projected upgrades, a full renovation. Without erasing a single thing that made the place his. They'd keep the name, the building, the soul. But he'd still be in charge. Miguel's eyes scanned the pages. It was everything he needed, more than he'd ever dared to ask for. New lifts, modern tools, funding, training programs, a living wage, a chance to turn this shop into something more than survival. But it also meant stepping into their world. A world of press releases and expectations, of being watched. "What's the catch?" he asked. Elena leaned forward, her voice low and steady. "That you don't change. That you keep being the man who helped a stranger for no reason. That you run this place with your heart." Miguel swallowed hard. They weren't just offering him a way out. They were offering him a way forward. Miguel closed the folder and set it down gently on the workbench. The edges were crisp, untouched by time or sweat or grit, everything the shop wasn't. Elena waited, quiet, not pushing, but her eyes held something deeper now, like she already knew what was coming. He walked to the center of the garage and stared up at the ceiling, where a rusted fan hung still and dead. The old sign swayed outside in the wind, the chain creaking, just loud enough to remind him of everything this place had survived. Everything he had survived. "So, I keep the name," he said slowly. "Keep the building. Keep the grease and the cracked floor and the stool with 3 legs." Elena nodded. "Exactly that. And I run it, with your people watching." "They're not here to watch," she said. "They're here to support. Full equipment upgrade. Staff, if you want it. Payroll, marketing. But you stay the face. You stay the soul." He turned back toward her. "And if I say no?" She hesitated. "Then it ends here. We walk away." Miguel studied her. There was no threat in her tone, no pressure, just finality. "I'd be selling more than a building," he said. "You'd be leading something bigger," she replied. "A movement built on what you've already done, built on kindness, real kindness, not corporate fluff. We won't stage it, we won't fake it. You already proved it works." He paced. The smell of oil, of old tires, and rain-damp rags clung to every corner of the shop. This place was more than his livelihood. It was his history. His father's voice still echoed in the walls. The memories weren't glossy. They were stained, but they were his. "Walk away forever," he repeated, just above a whisper. Elena didn't move. "You've already made a difference, Miguel. We're offering you the chance to make it louder." His hands clenched, not from anger, but from the terrifying weight of choice. This wasn't about saving a garage anymore. It was about becoming something he never imagined he could be. Visible, respected, heard, but only if he was willing to let the world see what had always been here. And that meant everything. Miguel sat on the floor of the garage, back against the tool cabinet, elbows resting on his knees. The folder lay open beside him, pages scattered like spilled plans. He couldn't bring himself to touch them again, not yet. The garage was quiet, but not the good kind. It was the kind that echoed too much, amplified every creak, every thought. The kind that reminded you of the things you'd rather forget. Failure had a smell, a feel. It clung to him like the grease on his fingers. He'd known it too well. The first time was when he tried to expand. Just 2 lifts, a paint booth, and a kid from the community college who swore he wanted to learn. Miguel borrowed money from a cousin, signed contracts he didn't read carefully enough, and believed that good intentions were enough to build something that lasted. 6 months later, the kid left. The lift collapsed. The bank took their cut. He'd worked double shifts just to pay off what little he could. And when the cousin stopped answering calls, Miguel didn't blame him. He wouldn't have answered either. His father had watched it all happen, never said, "I told you so." Just handed him a socket wrench and said, "Start with what's in front of you, and finish what you start." That was 3 years ago. Miguel hadn't gambled on anything since. Now, here it was again, another chance, another risk. Only this time, the scale was massive. This wasn't just about replacing a compressor or bringing in an apprentice. This was stepping into the light and not knowing if you'd get burned. Could he run this place with corporate backing? Could he keep his principles while standing next to people who wore suits that cost more than his truck? What if he failed again? What if he let them down? What if this garage became a monument to another mistake? He looked over at the photo of his father still taped to the side of the file cabinet, sun-faded, smiling, holding a wrench like it was the only thing that mattered. Miguel exhaled slowly. He wanted to believe he could do this, but wanting wasn't always enough. The lights had gone dim for the night, leaving the garage in shadows and shapes, just the hum of the old fridge in the corner keeping him company. Miguel sat alone on the floor, knees pulled up, staring at the grease-caked floor tiles he'd meant to replace for years, but never did. The air smelled like old metal and yesterday's rain. He was tired, not just bone-deep tired, but soul-tired, the kind that settles in after years of pushing forward without ever really knowing if you're getting anywhere. He closed his eyes and let the silence press in, and then, like it always did when he needed it most, his father's voice came back. "Fix what's broken, son, and not just machines." He remembered the day he heard it. Miguel had been 17, furious, covered in oil, hands bleeding from trying to force a rusted bolt on a Ford F-150 that had been left too long in the rain. He'd thrown a wrench, dented the toolbox, stormed out the back without a word. His father had followed him, slow and steady, wiping his own hands on a rag like nothing unusual had happened. "You think this place is about the cars?" he'd said, sitting beside him on the back steps. "It's not. It's about what we do with them, the people we help, the lives we keep rolling." Miguel had grumbled something teenage and stupid, but his father had just looked at him and smiled. "Fix what's broken, son, and not just machines." That had stuck. Long after his father's hand stopped working, long after the world got louder and faster and meaner, that one line stayed. Miguel opened his eyes now, staring up at the cracked ceiling, thinking about Elena's offer, thinking about the community, the kid who came in last year with holes in his shoes and a dream of learning engines, the single mom who cried when he didn't charge her for the brake job. This shop had always been more than bolts and belts. Maybe now it could be so much more, but only if he stepped out of his own fear, only if he remembered what his father always knew. That fixing the world started one small, broken thing at a time. The pen felt heavier than it should have, sleek, black, corporate. Miguel held it in his hand, staring at the dotted line like it was a cliff edge. Around him, the office was too clean, too quiet. Elena stood off to the side, watching but not saying a word. She didn't smile. She didn't push. She just waited, like she knew this was something he had to walk into on his own. He thought of the garage, the old door that stuck halfway up, the ancient lift that moaned every time it moved, the wall with the pencil marks where he used to track his height when he was a kid, back when his father would sit in the corner and sip coffee out of a cracked mug with grease on the handle. He thought about letting go, and then with one breath he signed. No applause, no trumpets, just the soft sound of the pen scratching paper and something inside him unlocking. The renovations started the next week. Trucks rolled in, unloading pallets of new tools, gleaming equipment, a fresh hydraulic lift that didn't sound like it was dying. The cracked tiles were replaced, but the original paint on the office wall, faded blue with his father's smudged handprint in the corner, was left untouched, framed in protective glass. His idea. They kept the front sign, polished it, reinforced it, but kept the rust stains and the chipped paint. It still read Manny's Auto and Tire. The name mattered. The history mattered. Villarreal Motors brought their people in, designers, engineers, consultants, but they all had the same instruction: don't change the heart. Miguel oversaw every step, every bolt, every wire. At night he sat at the same workbench, hands stained with the same oil, heart pounding with something he hadn't felt in years: hope. When they turned the lights back on for the first time, the garage glowed. Not in a flashy showroom kind of way, in a real way, like something reborn. Miguel stood in the doorway, looking at the place that raised him, that nearly buried him, and now, maybe, might just save him. This wasn't the end of a chapter. It was the first page of a new one. The ribbon was red and velvet, stretched tight across the front of the garage like a warning Miguel didn't know how to interpret. The new sign gleamed in the morning light. Manny's Auto and Tire, same name, but cleaner, crisper. Below it, in smaller letters, in partnership with Villarreal Motors. The font was modest, respectful. Miguel had insisted on that. Cameras were everywhere. Reporters, photographers, people with microphones and perfectly ironed suits asking questions like, "How does it feel to go from neighborhood mechanic to national figure?" And "Did you ever think you'd be the face of a corporate rebrand?" Miguel stood still beneath it all, hands shoved deep in his jacket pockets, the collar pulled up against the cold. He hadn't slept the night before. Too many thoughts, too many ghosts. He looked out at the crowd, local folks, Rosa from the bakery, Harold from across the street, the delivery guy who always brought parts a day late but never complained. They stood behind the journalists, awkward but proud. People he'd fixed brakes for, tuned engines for, lent tires to when they couldn't afford new ones. Elena stood to the side, not center stage, not stealing light, just watching, like she promised she would. Someone handed him the scissors. Miguel stared at them for a long second. This wasn't his world. Not really. He didn't know what to do with spotlights and flashbulbs. His hands were made for wrenches, not ribbon cutting. But the shop behind him, the walls, the tools, the smell of rubber and rust, it was still his. The lift was new, but the foundation was the same. He took the scissors, stepped forward, and cut the ribbon clean. The crowd clapped. Cameras clicked like fireworks, but all Miguel could feel was the weight lifting off his chest 1 inch at a time. After the ribbon was gone, people flooded in. Kids touched the new tire machine. Reporters filmed the old coffee pot in the corner, still labeled, "Do not touch." And Miguel? He stood near the workbench, heart thumping, grounding himself with the same mantra that had kept him going for years. Fix what's broken, and do it with heart. It started small. A young guy from marketing leaned against the freshly painted counter, chewing gum like he owned the place. He held a glossy trifold brochure in one hand, something with a smiling family next to a spotless SUV, and pointed at a bullet point that read, "Recommended upgrades for safety and efficiency." "Just mention it after every inspection," he said casually. "We're not forcing anything, just nudging. It's about perception." Miguel didn't even look up from the brake pads he was cleaning. "If it's not broken, I'm not selling it." The guy blinked. "Yeah, but that's not the point. It's not about what's broken. It's about what could break. It's how dealerships work. It builds trust." "No," Miguel said. "It builds commission, not trust." The guy chuckled like Miguel was being cute. "Look, it's standard practice. You don't have to hit targets or anything. Just work it into the conversation. We want consistency across locations." Miguel stood slowly, wiping his hands on the towel tucked into his belt. "This isn't a dealership, it's a garage. There's a difference." He walked away before the guy could respond, but it didn't stop there. The following week, they tried replacing the paper invoices with tablets. Customers started getting digital estimates with suggested add-ons already pre-checked. Miguel disabled the setting the same night. Then came the executive email about labor efficiency, too many hours logged per job, too much time spent on non-essential tasks. Miguel replied with a photo of a customer crying in the waiting room because her car wouldn't make it to her second job. His message was 3 words long: time well spent. The tension buzzed louder with each week. Suits would show up, smile too wide, ask too many questions. But Miguel didn't bend. He still handwrote notes for elderly customers who didn't use email, still comped work when someone was in real trouble, still used spare parts from his own shelves if it meant someone got home safe. He knew what they wanted: volume, image, scale. But he also knew what this place had always stood for, and if they thought they could walk into his shop and sell kindness like it came with a warranty, they'd picked the wrong mechanic. She came back unannounced the first time. No SUVs, no suits, no press trailing behind. Just a soft knock on the side door one evening after closing, when the sky was fading into bruised colors and Miguel was elbow-deep in a carburetor that refused to cooperate. He looked up, a little startled, grease on his cheek, and there she was, Elena, dressed simply this time. No heels, no blazer, just jeans, boots, and a calm look in her eyes. "You still leave the lights on this late?" she asked, smiling faintly. He wiped his hands on an old rag, nodded once. "They go off when the work's done." She didn't ask to come in, but she didn't need to. She stepped through the door like someone returning to a familiar room, eyes scanning the shop, the way it had changed, the way it hadn't. Her fingers brushed the edge of the counter. She smiled at the dent in the corner, the one she made when she bumped into it that first night. "You kept it," she said. Miguel shrugged. "Some things belong." That became the rhythm. She started coming by once a week, sometimes in the afternoon, sometimes at night. She'd bring coffee or leftover pastries from a boardroom meeting, or nothing at all. Some days they talked, others they worked in silence. She asked questions about cars, about repairs, about customers. But she never told him what to do. One night, after he helped a single mom with a flat tire and refused payment, Elena watched him from the corner. "You know you're ruining every expectation I grew up with," she said softly. Miguel looked up from the jack. That a bad thing? She shook her head. It's the first thing that's made sense in a long time. He didn't know what to say to that, so he didn't say anything, but he noticed the way she started staying longer, not as a boss, not as some brand ambassador. She listened more, asked about his father, brought in her own memories, quietly, carefully, like someone learning to breathe again. Miguel saw the shift. She didn't just believe in the campaign anymore, she believed in him. It started with the Corolla, a simple brake job, in and out. Miguel remembered the owner, nervous, young, first car, saved up for months just to afford the repairs. He double-checked everything himself before handing her the keys. She'd driven off smiling. 3 days later, she came back shaken and pale. Her brakes had locked up on the freeway. Miguel swore under his breath. He pulled the car into the bay and tore it down right there, refusing to take another job until he found out what went wrong. Pads were fine. Calipers, new. But the fluid lines, tampered, subtly. A tiny slit in the hose, small enough to leak only under pressure, like someone knew what they were doing. He didn't sleep that night. 2 more cars came back within the week. A steering column bolt missing. A tire improperly sealed. Miguel checked every service record, every technician. Nothing made sense. Then one of his new hires, a quiet kid named Luis, barely 19, came to him after hours, hands shaking, voice low. I saw a guy last week, after close, said he was with corporate, said he was doing a quality check on the inventory. Miguel narrowed his eyes. You let him in? Luis looked ashamed. He had a badge, looked official, wrote stuff down. I thought... Miguel didn't yell. He didn't need to. The silence was loud enough. He went straight to the cameras. The man was there, tall, shaved head, wearing a Villarreal Motors jacket, but Miguel didn't recognize him. Neither did Elena when he sent her the footage. That's not one of ours, she said, voice clipped. I'll handle it. But it was too late. Word had already started to spread. Didn't a car break down after he touched it? He's just a face now. Probably doesn't even turn a wrench anymore. Corporate puppet, just like the rest. Miguel walked through the shop with a new weight on his shoulders, every whisper like a blade. He'd built this place on trust, and now it was being chipped away, one sabotaged bolt at a time. This wasn't just business anymore, it was war. It happened on a Tuesday night, just after closing. Miguel stayed late, pretending to finish up paperwork he'd already done twice. Elena sat quietly in the office, watching the feed from the new security system they'd installed over the weekend. 4 hidden cameras tucked into corners, vents, even one embedded in a broken smoke detector above the parts cabinet. They hadn't told the staff, not even Luis. They were done guessing. At 9:47 p.m., the door clicked. Miguel didn't move. Elena leaned in toward the screen. There he was. Same man from the last tape. Tall, buzzed head, clean Villarreal jacket. He walked in like he owned the place, confident, quiet. He went straight to the service bay, not bothering with lights. His flashlight flicked on, narrow beam slicing through the dark. He moved like someone who had done this before. Elena's jaw tightened. He's not with us. I had HR check every division. No record. Miguel didn't reply. He just watched. The man headed to the Civic they'd finished that afternoon. Another single mom job, minimal charge, new fuel pump. Miguel's gut clenched. On the screen, the man opened the hood, reached into his coat, pulled out a small plastic bag, a razor-thin wire, and what looked like a rusted bolt. He swapped them quickly, expertly, like a surgeon in the dark. Elena leaned forward, eyes burning. He's not just trying to ruin the car, she whispered. He's trying to ruin you. Miguel's voice was like gravel. He's doing both. The man moved on, tried to open the parts locker, found it locked, cursed. Then he walked toward the camera in the vent, paused, and for a split second looked directly at it. Then he smiled. A small, smug thing. Elena froze. He knows. Miguel stood fast. We're not waiting. They called the police, then security, then legal. And by the time the man came back through the front door, Miguel was waiting, arms crossed, engine oil still on his shirt. "You picked the wrong shop," he said. The man didn't smile this time. He ran. But he didn't get far. By morning, it was everywhere. Local news broke the story first. Small-town mechanic sabotaged by industry insider, but within hours, it had made its way to national outlets. The footage of the man sneaking into the garage, the quiet footage of his precise hands tampering with bolts and wiring, played on a loop. Miguel's name trended before he even finished his first cup of black coffee. He didn't want the attention, didn't ask for it, but he didn't hide from it either. They set up cameras in front of the shop, reporters flooding the sidewalk, trying to get quotes through the gates. He stood on the same cracked concrete he'd nearly lost months ago and told the truth. "We fix cars here," he said, calm and steady. "But more than that, we look out for people. Someone tried to take that from us, but it didn't work. We're still here, and we're not going anywhere." His voice didn't waver. When they asked him why he thought he'd been targeted, he answered plainly, "Because we don't upsell, we don't cut corners, and we don't back down." Elena stood beside him for every interview, silent at first, then fierce. She called out the fake badge, launched an internal investigation, promised full transparency from Villarreal Motors, and backed it with real consequences. The man was found to be on the payroll of a rival dealership chain, a competitor trying to discredit the "Kindness Drives Us" campaign before it could grow. But instead of unraveling, it ignited. Customers showed up with flowers, notes taped to the garage door. Old clients returned, some after years, just to say thank you. Mechanics from other states wrote in, offering support, asking how to start their own version of what Miguel had built. The garage buzzed, not from scandal, but from solidarity. What they'd tried to destroy had only been strengthened. Miguel hadn't built a business, he'd built trust, and not even a smear campaign backed by millions could dismantle that. In a world used to sales pitches and spin, Miguel stood out for what he wasn't. He was real. And now the world saw it. They came with handshakes, casseroles, letters folded in envelopes that smelled like kitchen drawers, and perfume. Some just came to look at him, to see if he was real, the man who didn't sell what people didn't need, the mechanic who stood his ground. Within a week, the front desk was buried in envelopes, not bills, not final notices, letters from strangers, from customers who'd moved away years ago, from families who remembered how Miguel had once fixed their car on a holiday or stayed late for a single mom who couldn't wait until Monday. Handwritten notes on lined paper, crayon drawings from kids, thank you cards from people he didn't even remember helping. Some sent small donations, $20, a check for $50, a gift card taped to a note that read, "For your coffee, you've earned it." Elena stood in the back one afternoon, sorting through the pile, her eyes glassy. "You know this isn't normal, right?" she said, holding up a letter addressed in shaky cursive. "This doesn't happen for people like us, not in this world." Miguel just shook his head, still covered in oil, still elbow-deep in an engine. "I didn't think any of this was going to happen." People drove in from 2 to 3 hours away. They didn't even need repairs. They just wanted to shake his hand, take a photo, tell him their story. How they'd been scammed by chain shops, lied to by mechanics who saw them as wallets on wheels. How seeing him fight back gave them hope. The parking lot turned into a sort of pilgrimage. Food trucks showed up. A local band offered to play for free. Someone donated a stack of folding chairs. Miguel let them sit in the shade near the old soda machine and told them stories between tire rotations. He didn't ask for any of it, never advertised, never played the hero. But something was shifting, not just for him, but around him. The whole shop felt warmer, alive, and somewhere deep down, under all the disbelief and fatigue, Miguel finally let himself feel it. He hadn't just fixed cars. He'd started something that couldn't be unbolted, something that mattered. The building stretched high into the sky, all mirrored glass and polished steel, reflecting clouds that Miguel didn't trust. It was the kind of place where the floors were too clean, the air too still, the walls too quiet. He walked behind Elena, his boots squeaking against marble that probably cost more than his entire shop roof. His coveralls were clean, but still carried the faint scent of oil and sweat. He felt it, all of it, the stairs, the weight, the absurdity. He didn't belong here, not in this place of corner offices and silent elevators. But Elena kept walking, calm and steady in heels that clicked with confidence. She didn't speak, just gave him a small nod as they stepped out onto the executive floor. The doors opened into a wide, vaulted lobby. Silver plaques lined the walls. Men in suits, frozen in time, stared down from framed portraits. Founders, pioneers, the visionaries who built engines before most people had seen a car. Then, at the end of the hall, beside a large glass conference room, was a smaller frame, new, hung lower than the rest. Miguel stopped. It was him, not a headshot, not staged, just a candid photo someone had taken the day after the scandal broke. Him under the hood, sleeves rolled up, eyes focused, dirt smudged across his brow. In the background, blurred but unmistakable, was a single mother holding her child, watching him work. Beneath the photo was a brass plate. It read, "Miguel Alvarez, proof that integrity drives us forward." His throat tightened. He stepped closer, unsure if he should laugh or leave. "They didn't want it at first," Elena said softly behind him. "Said it didn't match the style of the others. I told them that was the point." Miguel looked at her, eyes sharp. "Why me?" "Because when the system forgot what it stood for, you reminded us. You didn't just fix cars, Miguel. You reminded us what trust feels like." He stared at the photo a moment longer. He hadn't asked for recognition. But now, standing there among the giants, he didn't feel small. He felt like he'd earned his place. The new commercial aired during the evening news, prime time, right between a weather warning and a political ad. Miguel hadn't known it was coming. No one told him. He was sitting in the break room with Luis, half listening to a ball game on the radio, eating microwaved noodles out of a styrofoam cup. The sound from the TV mounted in the corner pulled his attention. Something in the tone, something in the silence. The screen went black. Then his garage. Not a recreation. His garage. The cracked floor. The dented workbench. The stool with one leg shorter than the rest. Him, under the hood of the same minivan he'd worked on the night before. No actors, no script. A narrator's voice cut in, deep, warm, steady. "We forgot what mattered. For too long we sold speed, gloss, guarantees. But sometimes the engine of trust is built on something simpler, honesty." Footage rolled of other shops, ones Villarreal had renovated across the country, places in Detroit, Oakland, rural Mississippi. Garages now outfitted with better tools, cleaner spaces, but the same core principle: fair prices, no upselling, and mechanics empowered to do what was right, not what was profitable. Miguel didn't move, couldn't. The ad ended on his photo, that photo, his hands on a child's go-kart, helping her tighten a wheel, his back to the camera, sunlight catching the sweat on his neck. Villarreal Motors, driven by kindness, fueled by trust. The screen went dark again. Luis turned to him, eyes wide. "That's you." Miguel swallowed, nodded once, said nothing. The phones lit up the next day, calls from customers asking about the new pricing model, independent mechanics wanting to join, local news crews wanting a follow-up. But something deeper changed. When people walked into the shop now, they didn't look at Miguel like a mechanic. They looked at him like a movement. Villarreal Motors had rebranded, yes, but it wasn't just paint and policy. They'd shifted their center of gravity, moved away from cold profit margins and toward something messier, braver, people. And at the core of it all, whether he wanted to be or not, was Miguel, steady hands, tired eyes, and the same stubborn heart that refused to charge a dime more than what was fair. Not just the face of a company, the soul of one. The first kid showed up on a Saturday morning. He couldn't have been more than 16. Baggy hoodie, worn sneakers, calluses on his hands that didn't come from sports. He hovered at the edge of the parking lot, pretending to look at his phone, glancing toward the garage like it might bite. Miguel saw him, but didn't call out. He just opened the bay door, turned the music down, and laid out a socket set with one extra wrench. The kid wandered in an hour later, asked if he could sweep. Miguel handed him a broom and said nothing else. By the end of the week, 2 more showed up. Word got out. Quiet, fast, real. You could learn at Manny's, not just how to change a tire or rotate brakes, but how to hold a tool the right way, how to listen to an engine, how to stay late and finish a job right, even if it meant missing dinner. Miguel started offering Saturday workshops. He didn't advertise, didn't charge a fee, just unlocked the door and let them come. Half the time he didn't even teach. He just worked with them, shoulder to shoulder, corrected their hand position, showed them how to diagnose by sound, not just sensors, made them redo it if they rushed. He gave them purpose, quietly, consistently. Some of the kids came from rough spots, homes where food was a maybe, trust was broken, and adults only talked when they were angry. Miguel didn't ask questions. He didn't need to. They called him Mr. M, or just boss. One started leaving post-it notes on the door. Thanks for not giving up on us. He kept the notes in a drawer beneath the register. By the time the school board called to ask if he'd consider making it an official apprenticeship program, Miguel had already bought 6 extra toolkits with his own money. He'd seen what it looked like when no one handed you a chance. He wasn't just fixing cars anymore. He was fixing futures. One kid, one wrench, one Saturday at a time. She came by more often now, not with contracts or proposals, not with corporate liaisons shadowing her every move, just herself. Sometimes with coffee, sometimes with silence, sometimes with a book she never quite got around to reading. And Miguel had stopped wondering why. The shop had its rhythm, metal clanging, the whir of impact wrenches, the occasional burst of laughter from one of the apprentices. But he'd grown used to the sound of her footsteps on the concrete, soft and deliberate, like she was walking through a memory she hadn't fully let herself believe yet. One night, after the last car had rolled out and the lights had dimmed to a warm glow, they sat outside on a bench beside the shop. No media, no schedule, just the hum of the town settling in for the night. Elena held a paper cup, fingers wrapped around it like she needed the warmth more than the caffeine. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked suddenly. "Signing with us?" Miguel didn't answer right away. He looked up at the sky where the stars were fighting through the city haze. "I regret not trusting myself sooner," he said, "but no, not this." She nodded, eyes on the gravel. "I've lived most of my life in rooms where everything's calculated, where love, trust, loyalty, they're just leverage. It's hard to unlearn that." He turned toward her. "You've been unlearning it here?" She smiled, small and tired, every day. There wasn't a big moment between them, no grand declaration, just a hand brushing his as she passed him a socket wrench one afternoon, or the way her voice softened when she said his name. It was in the pauses, in the glances held a second longer than necessary, in the way they didn't have to explain anything anymore. He started noticing things, how she always took her coffee 2 sugars, no cream, how she read repair manuals like novels, how she kept a photo of her younger self in her wallet, not out of vanity, but as a reminder of the girl who used to believe in something simple. She had found something honest here. And Miguel, he had found something he hadn't dared to want in years. Her. It was just after sunset when the engine coughed outside. Same gravel crunch, same hiss of steam from under the hood. Miguel looked up from his bench, heart tugging with a flicker of something he couldn't quite name. Recognition, maybe. Not of the car, but of the moment. He stood slowly, wiping his hands on the rag that never left his belt loop. The old radio played softly in the background, the same local station his father used to keep on during long shifts. The garage lights buzzed to life overhead, casting warm halos across concrete and steel, Outside, the car idled, dying in uneven stutters. A girl stepped out, maybe 19, maybe 20. Sweat on her brow, a backpack slung low on one shoulder, her jeans stained with road dust. She popped the hood and stared into the mess like it had just betrayed her. Miguel reached for the door, but before he got there, another voice called out, "I got it, boss." Luis. He was already halfway across the lot, tool roll under one arm, expression calm but focused. He greeted the girl with a nod, asked a few questions, listened without interrupting. Miguel watched from the doorway, arms crossed over his chest, the faintest smile pushing into the corners of his face. The girl's panic softened. Her shoulders relaxed. She looked at Luis like he'd just pulled her out of quicksand. He knelt beside the engine, called for a part number over his shoulder. One of the new apprentices answered, ran to grab it. Miguel didn't move, just stood there watching them work, watching something he'd built, something he'd almost lost, breathe on its own. He looked over to the wall where the old photo still hung, his father's smile. The same wrench in hand, Miguel now kept in a drawer, wrapped in cloth like an heirloom. This wasn't just his garage anymore. It was theirs. And as the girl thanked Luis and stepped into the lobby for water, Miguel let the door swing closed behind him, the bell above it ringing out into the dusk. Legacy wasn't a plaque. It was motion. It was passed hand to hand, wrench to wrench. And it was just getting started.